Oh, howdy y'all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. Welcome to day 16 of teaser season for patch 3.28. Mirage League is just around the corner. I'm starting to think of my league starter plans, and I'm sure a lot of you are. I was at one point thinking I was going to go spell totems. I'm now being pulled slightly closer towards kinetic fusillade totems, but I'm definitely thinking of other things at the same time. And I'm sure a lot of you are having the same sort of decision paralysis I am. Anyways, today we have a few pieces of news that are quite important. We have a major interview. Now, LEP Tech over on the Path of Exile 1 subreddit has done a write-up of this. I did listen to the entirety of the Zizaran, Andrew, and Octavian interview. It was really interesting. I'll put a link to the original video down in the description below, but I will also put a link to this great write-up. This write-up is not 100% absolutely everything that's in it, but it's a really good summary, and it does catch most of it. So that's the first thing that's there. We'll go through this extensively. Secondarily, there were a number of changes that were made to the patch notes today. We've got some things to talk about here. Viper Striker the Mamba is not getting nerfed as badly as we thought it was. And on top of that, there's a few other things that relate to exalted orbs in particular. More on that in a sec. And of course, we've got the details of the Reliquarian ascendancy. More on this in a bit, but there's a lot of interesting things here, and also a few less generic high power options than there were in the previous scavenger. These are more build enabling. There are definitely some things that are just pure power, but there's also a lot of things that are more complex to use. So we'll have a look at that at one point in this video as well. But I want to start with the interview because this is the biggest single piece of news today. There is a lot to go through here. I'm not quite going to cover everything, but I want to start by talking about elemental hit. So editing log here, we have some updates that are important. I have had to redact an entire section of this video where I was talking about the interaction between the Cryogenesis Breachlord Bloodline Notable and melee-based elemental hit. Grinding Games have had some internal discussions. They don't want the best build of the league to be a name-lock melee skill. So for that reason, they have decided to make sure that it is not a name-lock melee skill, and they have changed some of the things that were said during the podcast, and they've made the decision that the Cryogenesis Breachlord Bloodline Notable, this is not going to interact with melee elemental hit. So all that section of the video I've recorded can finally be scrapped, and that can be scrapped before it goes live, which is nice. I don't need to make a correction in tomorrow's video. So thank you for Grinding Games for putting this comment out just at the time that was necessary to prevent me from spreading things that would have been correct at the time, but that would have very rapidly become misinformation. Next up, there was a lot of discussion and elaboration on the Mirage mechanics. So if you go splat in a Mirage, assuming that you're not in hardcore or that you're not in a Valdo Voided map, in which case you're going to be sent off to the Void or sent off to the non-hardcore version of your league. But if you're not in that situation, then you can go back in the Mirage at that point. So you can then attempt it again. It's not something that has that sort of medium core type. You only get one shot at this particular mechanic. If you go splat, you're splat. Like you would have, for instance, in an Elva incursion that's found inside a map. Now, there's a bunch of questions that were asked about how it interacts with various mechanics. With Ritual, you're going to probably only see one Ritual inside the Mirage area, but it will be giga-juiced, and they've designed it so that if you do all of the Rituals, you should expect that the total amount of tribute that you can get is roughly double what you could get just from the 4 that would normally be in there. If you have an Abyss and it starts inside the Mirage, but then it paths outside, then it's just going to disgorge a huge sea of monsters in a pit at the end. That should be really good if you've got a build that has some sort of kind of kill automation. So for instance, if you're playing something like a totem build, or in particular, if you're playing something that has ignite proliferations with explosions, or poison proliferation with the new buff Beanos, this could potentially be very strong as well. You could just kill one monster, and then everything that spawns just goes splat straight away. One very important clarification, certain things do not work very well with it. So firstly, separate zones, and by separate zones I mean areas that have an actual load screen to them. So this is Labyrinth Trials, this is Abyssal Depth, this is the Vileside areas, this is Syndicate areas and the like. They're just not going to work. However, ones that don't have a load screen, they generally will. Also, Mirages, they do not copy master missions. This is mostly because of some real complexities that would have come up otherwise with Jun. So Jun was not going to work with them, and as a result, they ended up just making it for all of them. At least that's my interpretation of why they've chosen to do that. However, Harvest is not something that requires an additional load screen, I don't believe, and you will be able to get another Harvest Grove in there, and that will interact properly. The Viridian Wildwood will not work in conjunction with the Mirage, but pretty much everything else does. And there is a bit of a side effect option here where there is a wish to add wisps. Also, if there is a delirium mirror in the world, now the write-up here doesn't quite go into all the details here. This is where Octavian and Andrew were conferring with each other just to make sure that it worked the way they thought they did, and that the planned intention, the way that Andrew thought it worked, was that if there's a delirium mirror that spawns inside the map and you went into it, then there'll be a delirium mirror that is present inside the Mirage. That's the way he believes it works, but he wanted to confirm that, and so it wasn't absolutely 100% certain that this is the way that it works. And Mirage interacts with Veldo maps, but not in any sense that might duplicate the special rewards there. I think this is actually going to mean that Veldo maps are going to be considerably harder, especially the ones that have the 5-minute hard enrage timer on them. Those ones might end up being pretty much incompletable during the Mirage environment because you go into the Mirage zone and it's just going to add a whole bunch of extra monsters. I don't know if those monsters actually count though. Maybe if you don't ever go into the Mirage, they don't ever count as spawned. Don't know how that's going to work. We'll find that out. Now, a couple of questions were raised about how various top-end juicing options will interact with each other. For example, tier 16.5 maps, how do they interact with the entire map is a Mirage, rarer maps that will exist? And how do these interact with the new versions of what used to be called tier 17s, which are the nightmare maps? These are basically going to be separate systems from each other, mostly. However, there are some combinations that can exist, but most importantly, tier 16.5 maps cannot be also a full Mirage map. And this should mean that there will be different metas that develop rather than people wanting to stack all of these layers together. Instead, you're going to have to pick between the ones that can stick together. Additionally, the new astrolabes cannot be applied to nightmares, the spiritual successors to tier 17s. So that's something else that means that whilst you can juice through these ways, you can't just stack every single possible option together. Instead, you're going to have to pick and select the ones that you want. Now, you could potentially find yourself getting various bosses, Pinnacle bosses even, inside your maps, and that's from the wishes. The wishes are something that when you go into one of the maps that has a Mirage in it, you'll have a dialogue option where you can choose between 3 different wishes, and some of those will be very nasty ones. Some of them will be things like spawn a feared member in the map. They can drop their uniques if you get one, and it'll be the standard Pinnacle, not the Uber Pinnacle version. Also, once you defeat the Egon questline, final map bosses will have a chance to drop astrolabes. It will not just be incarnations that can drop them, they'll always have a 100% drop rate on these astrolabes, but it will also be all of your final map bosses that are present, they'll have a chance to drop one, and that's going to mean that there's a source of getting these by speccing destructive play. A number of questions were asked about the OP Shrine Belt, and essentially the way that I would summarize this is that it is still somewhat being iterated on. They couldn't give full answers, and they also said they want some things to be discovered when they go live. You definitely won't get a Divine Shrine, but some things are being worked on in the background. Some things are still being changed there. And designer Andrew said that it is going to be very, very crazy and very, very rare for certain combinations. A lot of questions went on about borrowed power in general. This league, one of the things that's coming up here is the imbued gems, and that these will be something that is borrowed power for this league, but it may not be the only form of borrowed power this league. Additionally, these are going to be something that are inherently stronger on attack builds than they are on Spellcaster builds, and that's because Spellcaster builds, they have to choose between a level 21 gem and an imbued gem, whereas an attack build, the choice is obvious. You always take the imbued gem because going from level 20 to 21, unless you're talking about elemental hit, it generally doesn't matter very much. Also, the sense that I got is that these are going to be fairly rare, but not crazy rare. So getting the exact combination that you want might be pretty hard to do. And you might want to think about some backups you're willing to accept. And then ultimately, you could have a long-term goal of getting the exact perfect 2020 plus imbue gem that you want, and some 2020 plus bad imbue gems that you'll use until you get that. There are a bunch of other things that came up as well. Is Ignite falling behind? Because there were a number of changes where Ignite was being balanced around the old version of Defiled Forces. The old version of Defiled Forces finally got nerfed this patch, and Granny Gear Games are going to consider if Ignite's in a bad state or not, but they'll decide that after this patch. I actually think Ignite is probably still at least okay this league. There are definitely a few Ignite builds that are working well. What I don't think is in a good spot at the moment is melee-based Ignite, but there's a couple of new toys for it, so we'll see if anyone makes anything work with that. There are questions about transfigured gems in the future, a number of other things, but one thing I really want to point out is something that was finished on, which is that in the future, Grinding Gear Games want to have some changes to synthesized items. So they're planning something whereby rerolling synthesized implicits may be something that is less extreme in the future. And they mentioned that various rare Einhar beasts are going to have their drop chances increased in patch 3.28, but the one that is not getting it increased is going to be the Vivid Vulture. Let's go through those patch note changes now, starting with the partial unnerfing of Viper Striker the Mamba. Viper Striker the Mamba was something Grinding Gear Games thought was a problem for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it was the best strike skill for hit damage. Also, it was a very good strike skill for poison. Well, what they're going for here is making it so that the decreased damage that's coming up here, so the primary function of the nerf, this is going to be a nerf to using it as a hit skill. So it's not going to be the big crushing nerf that it was to using it as a poison skill. This, in conjunction with some other things that come up later, are pretty significant. And I do think Viper Striker the Mamba, whilst it is weaker than it was in the past, some of the itemization that exists for it is potentially better. And there is going to be more on this, including the very last line of these patch note changes. It also has this line. Now, this is intended to prevent it from interacting extremely well with Betrayal's Sting, which is one of the new unique items that was added to the Incarnations. Viper Striker the Mamba now also has cannot inflict multiple poisons in the same hit, as additional ways to apply multiple poisons in a single hit would otherwise have to be significantly weakened for the sake of this skill. This does not affect the skill's normal dual-wielding behavior, as it causes a single hit, and therefore applies a single poison based on the combined damage of both weapons. We've got here, if you are making a dual wield strike with Viper Striker the Mamba, you're going to be suffering that 30% less attack speed that was added in this earlier nerf here. That's something that's reasonably nasty, but it is just something that slows down your ability to hit enemies and get things started. It doesn't affect your actual DPS once you strike. Once you do make that strike though, you'll then end up with one single massive poison. You can't get multiple poisons with it. I do think that this is still fine because you can get to dot cap reasonably easily with Viper Striker the Mamba, especially when we come down to the low tolerance changes. That will be the very last one here. The majority of harvest bees that can be captured by Einhar for beast crafting are now much more common. And when we said the majority of them, this is all of them except the Vivid Vultures. That was clarified over in the interview before. The rare monster item bonus to convert all equipment items to currency is now more common. Now, if you played during Kalandra League, you might have very bad memories of this thing existing. This was the thing that would sometimes result in those screenshots where a player would have 85 Divine Orbs and 85 Exalted Orbs sitting on the ground next to each other. The reason that that was such a game-breaking thing in Kalandra was that it was predictable. You knew it was coming before you slayed the monster, and as a result, you could then say, right, let's get 6 players in here. One of them is going to be a Magic Find color, and then and only then are we going to take it down. Nowadays, though, that's not an option. You don't know it's coming, and so more often, you're just going to kill a monster and just go, oh, cool, I got 27 different currency items, 1 or 2 of which are some of the rarer currencies. So this is going to be something that will be a nice little bonus when you're mapping, but not really something that transforms the economy the way that the Kalandra version of this did. Added 1 new vendor SP. We have no idea what this is going to be. We'll find it out at some point. Now, if you're the person that figures this out, you're probably going to be able to make a lot of currency out of it, assuming that it generates something that's in hot demand from things that are not so hot. So what I would ask people to do is at least consider, if you do end up figuring this out yourself, letting people know about it, but maybe not for the first 6 to 12 hours. So take advantage of the short-term opportunities that you've got by having knowledge that other people don't have, but then share that knowledge afterwards. That, I think, is the fairest way. It balances your ability to set yourself up for the whole league, alongside making sure that the whole community can play around with whatever new toy is added there. Now, next up, we have 9 changes that are all the same suite of changes. All of these relate to the shakeup that's taking place in base monster drops of currency items. There's a lot to go through here, but the key thing is that Exalted Orbs are being made more common from all sources, and I think it might be a lot. I'll talk about why I think that it might be 10 times as common as they were before, which would make them more common than Regal Orbs currently are, but still rarer than Regret Orbs were prior to the last nerf that took place. That said, more common than Regret Orbs are currently. That's something we'll discuss when we come to the Exalt Shard recipe. On top of that, there's a bunch of heist trinkets that are being changed. So the mods that cause Chaos Orbs and Regal Orbs to drop as Exalted Orbs instead, these would no longer be special, so they're not going to exist. Added new Heist Trinket modifiers, granting a chance for Chaos Orbs and Regal Orbs to drop as Ancient Orbs instead. So chances are Ancient Orbs might actually be in the same rarity that Exalteds used to be, but we'll have to find that one out. Lower the values on Heist Trinket modifiers that granted a chance in Heist for Regal Orbs to drop as Divine Orbs. Existing items with these modifiers are unaffected by this change. So your Legacy Regal to Divine Orb Heist Trinkets are going to be absurdly good. And the reason for this is that this change is going to be way better than it used to be. It used to be 2, 3, or 4% for Regal Orbs to convert to Divines, but the thing is that Regal Orbs are going to be much more common after these changes. They've already called that out in earlier patch notes, and so those trinkets are going to be much better. Chances are the new ones are just going to be 1%, maybe 1 or 2%, depending on where GGG decide to set Regal Orbs at in rarity. Enabled Inscribed Ultimatums to double Ancient Orbs and Fracturing Orbs. Inscribed Ultimatums for Exalted Orbs are now at higher stack sizes and have lower difficulty on average. So a quick aside here, I've seen a lot of people making commentary about Fracturing Orbs being extremely rare in the future as a result of them going core, no longer being target farmable. I want to have a look at what I think Grinding Gear games are likely to set the drop rate at. And the precedent is the divination card IC Brothers. This divination card is one that I believe is currently tied to the Strand map, but drop weights are really well known on most divination cards. And that's because the Faustus currency exchange leaks a whole bunch of information about the drop weights of the cards. And with the precise cost that it is to request an IC Brothers from someone, we can pretty much guarantee that its drop weight is not close to 27, but exactly 27. For comparison, the drop weight of the Apothecary is 9, the drop weight of the divination card that awards you 5 Divine Orbs is 60, and the drop weight of the Fortunate, which is 1/6 of a Divine Orb per card, is 1,800. So, for every 100 Divine Orbs that drop, I'm expecting to see 9 Fracturing Orbs drop, because currently everything's been set up by Grinding Gear Games as though Grinding Gear Games consider 9 Fracturing Orbs to be about as special as 100 Divine Orbs. Now, the Trade League economy isn't going to agree with this. The Trade League economy is not going to price Fracturing Orbs quite as high as that might indicate. They're not going to be a fair trade, 9 Fracturing Orbs against 100 Divines. I think we're going to see Fracturing Orbs in the medium single-figure Divines, if this is the case. However, all of this is predicated upon 2 things. Firstly, that the Faustus weight does actually reflect how special Grinding Gear Games considered Fracturing Orbs to be prior to all of the changes that are taking place here. And secondly, that Grinding Gear Games don't shake things up a little bit. Who knows, maybe they decide they want Fracturing Orbs to be crazy rare, like way rarer than Sacred Orbs. Or maybe they decide they want them to be much more accessible, and they set them to what an Orb of Annulment used to be rarity-wise. And if that happens, then I think we'll see Fracturing Orbs, despite the fact they're really good, I think we'll see them being very affordable very quickly. Ultimately, it comes down to, do Grinding Gear Games want Fracturing Orbs to be a jackpot drop, a really exciting moment, or do they want them to be something that drops a lot more often so you can count on having them, but at the same time, much less exciting when they drop? And that's decisions they'll make, but the status quo is expect them to be about 11 times rarer than Divine Orbs. So this means Exalted Orbs are just treated as less special by pretty much everything in the game, and Ancient Orbs and Fracturing Orbs are kind of replacing them as some of those more special currencies. Eater of Worlds altars can now have modifiers for Eldritch monsters or map bosses to drop Ancient Orbs. Very important to note, no Fracturing Orb options here. They don't have Sacred Orbs either. These things are going to be rare, I think. Ancient Orbs and Fracturing Orbs, they're going to be available as Sanctum rewards, and they have lowered the currency exchange gold fees for Exalted Orbs, Exalted Shards, and Regal Orbs. Very important note, there is nothing here about Alteration Orbs, and that is going to be something that will be really difficult with the upcoming Trade League economy. I don't think that Exalted Orbs are going to make a good secondary currency. I don't think there's enough syncing of them. Yes, you can use them extensively on preparing maps to make 4-mod maps, but the thing is that rolling maps is kind of less of a thing people do these days. The 8-mod Scarab got a buff in this league. The 8-mod Scarab, it's not that it got personally buffed, it's that quality on maps is no longer really that important, and as a result, the 8-mod Scarab is going to be used more than it was. So with that in mind, I don't think Exalts, even with lower fees, are going to have a huge impact here. People definitely aren't going to trade in Regal Orbs, so I think that we're still looking at either alterations or scourings, or maybe GCPs. A lot of people have said they think GCPs might be the secondary currency. No one's going to want Chaos Orbs except out of inertia. Chaos Orbs just aren't that useful anymore. So we're going to have a real mess figuring out exactly where the economy lands. But I do think we're going to see a situation where the currency exchange, whatever currency gets picked, whether it's alterations, GCPs, scours, or something else, that's ultimately the player base's decision rather than mine. But whatever ends up getting picked, gold costs for Faustus are going to feel somewhat oppressive compared to what we're used to. Back when Chaos Orbs were 15G to request, which they still will be, but Chaos Orbs are going to be pretty much worthless in the future, probably about the same trade value as an alteration has now. So for that reason, it's going to be really weird working out how everything goes. Crafting bench options. A bunch of these used to cost 1 Exalted Orb. Those are going to have their cost nerfed to 4 Exalts, and this is actually still going to be buffed because I think for various reasons that getting 4 Exalts is going to be easier than getting 1 was in the past. The reason GGG are doing this is that there's often tiered crafting rewards. So there'll be one of them that costs 1 Exalt, that'll be the top tier. Then there'll be a second tier that'll cost 4 or 8 Chaos. And then there'll be a third tier that costs something more trivial like Alchemy Orbs. And they didn't want a situation where 1 Exalt ends up being cheaper than the second tier choice. So they're going to make those cost 4 Exalts, and that's generally, so some of them might be different to that. Okay, so here we have the vendor recipe for a full set of influenced items of the same type. This now returns 1 Exalt rather than 2 Exalted shards, so 1/10 of an Exalt. And this is again doubled if all the items are unidentified, and it is probably tripled if all of the items are unidentified 20 quality. That's all of the items that take traditional quality. We're not talking about all of the amulets and the like. So what we're seeing here is Grinding Gear Games have decided to make it 10 times the payoff for vendoring one of these sets. This is something that they kind of didn't really need to do, but they're doing it, I think, because they've decided to make Exalts about 10 times less special than they used to be, which means that you can definitely spam them a lot more aggressively. This is why I think that the drop rate for Exalts is probably going to be about 10 times what it used to be. Previously, for every 1 Divine Orb that dropped, you would see 6 Regal Orbs, you would see 48 Chaos Orbs, you would see 160 Alteration Orbs. So it looks like they're going to be making it so that you get 10 Exalts in there. That's my general thought on this. It may not be exactly that number. That means you'll probably see an Exalted Orb or 2 most runs of the campaign, and sometimes you'll see 3 or 4. Seldom you'll see 0. That's about the sort of level I'm expecting them to be at, but we'll see exactly where they decide to set it up. A couple other little changes here. Small Atlas passives are granted a 2% chance for 1 monster in your maps to have an additional connected map. That stat no longer works, so instead it's going to be 2% increased maps found in your maps. And based on the way that we think that works, not 100% certain on that, but that will displace some of the other items that you would get. Not by very much, because maps aren't that common, but if you were to double the amount of maps that you're getting, that would be like maybe a 0.5 to 0.6% nerf to all of the drops that you're getting of other things that are not maps. Kirac shop is now going to sell a wider variety of map-related items, and his shop can be re-rolled with gold. Maps within his shop generally sell for gold, although some special items may still sell for Chaos Orbs or Orbs of Chance. I'm going to see what these map-related items are. If this means he's often selling scarabs, then this could be a very, very useful gold sink. We shall have to see on that one. Finally, in remove patch notes, I did say there was going to be more to say about the Beano's Kitchen Knife / Viper Striker the Mamba setup, and that is that low tolerance cluster jewel passive notable. This is being unnerfed. The nerf that was talked about is being reverted. So poisons you inflict on non-poisoned enemies, they are still going to deal their 300% damage that they were doing in the past. There was a period where they were planning to nerf that to 200%, and that was probably going to kill Viper Striker the Mamba off completely. Now I think it's back on the agenda, but it is a very, 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 very polarizing playstyle. So only play it if you're sure that it looks like it'll be fun. Right, so let's talk about the Reliquarian. The Reliquarian was also teased. In fact, this was teased during the interview with Zizaran. So that's where it was originally spoken about, but we want to go through all of the details here. I'm going to start in the top right and go counterclockwise. And if you're wondering, this is why I've had my face center right on this page rather than somewhere else. It's for this section of the video. Kilowava's Buster. Now, 25% chance to avoid elemental ailments is useful if that is decisive in taking you up to 100%. Otherwise, I don't think it's a very good stat. Most of the ways people tend to get this stat up to 100% come from somewhere else. The reason that I say 100% is such a breakpoint here is because at 99%, you still suffer the full effect of elemental ailments that are on the ground, but at 100%, you're immune. And that's really significant. There's that huge breakpoint there. On top of this, 40% chance for elemental resistances to count as being 90% against enemy hits. This is really, really solid as a defensive layer, but it's also really unreliable. I don't see myself taking this unless it's just a short-term thing while I'm sitting at 75% elemental ailment avoidance from other sources. I'm just not sold on this one. There will be the odd time that this makes you feel really tanky and really great, but there'll also be a lot of times that it's not. Barusso's Ambition, 20% movement speed, 23% chaos resistance. This is already excellent. Oh, and it does something else as well. Great. But mostly, this is 20% movement speed as a 3-pointer on an ascendancy, not a 2-pointer, and you get more. Just the 20% movement speed had me sold, but 23% chaos resistance, that's not very much icing on the cake, but it is icing. More of Conquest. Most people don't want this. Unaffected by poison is one of those things that's kind of nice to have, but most of the time it's the same as immune to poison, and ultimately poison is probably the least dangerous of all the ailments you're going to face. There are times that you are inflicting poisons on yourself. In those circumstances, More of Conquest is incredibly, incredibly good. This is particularly good in conjunction with things like the Golden Rule. The difference between unaffected and immune. Immune means that if you have poison on you, it falls off immediately. That means that you aren't considered to be poisoned. Unaffected means that you're not taking damage, but you are considered to be poisoned if you care about that for something else. If you want to use More of Conquest, you absolutely know the exact details of why you want to use it. Most of the time, this isn't going to be worth it. And whilst 40% of damage taken recouped as life is good, I don't think it's enough on its own, even if you just consider unaffected to be immune to poison. I think this is something that's very build around, but there are ways to build around it. They'll be interesting. Let's skip Victario's influence for a bit. Let's go for the thing that's generic good stuff, the Brass Dome. 3% to all maximum elemental resistances. That's elemental only. Comes with a couple of drawbacks though. Strength provides no maximum bonus to life and removes all energy shield. But you also get another 2 defensive bonuses. Armor from your equipped body armor is doubled, and you suffer no additional damage from critical strikes. There is just a lot of generic defensive power that is in this item, and the Brass Dome, I think, is going to be one of the default choices. If nothing else jumps out at you, take the Brass Dome. It's giving you a lot. But you have to be playing this on an Antiquarian that does not care about losing all of their energy shield. So that's a bit build constraining, and you probably only want to use it in conjunction with a very, very high armor chest. But there is a lot of power to be had here. Now let's talk Victario's influence. 40% increased area of effect for aura skills, 15% reservation efficiency of skills, and +2 to the level of aura skill gems. Most of you are probably thinking, hey, I like that. That's going to be great on my aura bot. But I also want to remind you that Pyroclast Mines exists. Pyroclast Mines is a skill that is aura tagged, and it deals more damage if you have +2 gem levels on it. Also on top of that, it's something that benefits from reservation efficiency, and it benefits from area of effect of aura skills. So this is something that is very build defining. This is something that you want on a Pyroclast Mine build, and it's something that gives you a lot of power, gives you a lot of damage, and it does so quite early in your character's progression. Even if you don't want to play a Pyroclast Mine build at endgame, maybe consider leveling your Antiquarian whilst using the Victario's influence option. Editing Gog here. I just realized I keep calling this thing the Antiquarian. It's the Reliquarian. The Antiquarian was a different Freesia exclusive ascendancy. It was for the Marauder, but they both had a very similar theme, so I'm probably going to keep confusing them, honestly. So make sure that you build your Antiquarian for Victario's influence carefully. After this, let's come to the things you can choose between when you get to Merciless Labyrinth, shall we? Let's start with a Reliquarian's attack-based weapons. So firstly, Jack the Axe grants level 30 Thirst for Blood skill. Thirst for Blood is incredibly, incredibly strong, if and only if you're playing a bleed character. So you need to be really heavily invested into it. You can normally only get Thirst for Blood in conjunction with using the good early on, but very quickly obsoleted unique axe, Jack the Axe. Jack the Axe is really, really good on day 1 and day 2. It was enough for me in patch 3.25 to take down a bunch of tier 17 map bosses, but ultimately, I got rid of it when I was able to recombinate something that was better than it. And that's generally the case with Jack the Axe. It's also a one-handed axe, so you can't use it as a two-hander, and that's something that can be limiting as well. But Jack the Axe offers a lot of power, and it's something that you can get in conjunction with a great general all-purpose weapon as well. So that's Jack the Axe. That's something that's very strong, but only if you're playing a bleed build. and you need to find enough in the rest of the ascendancy to justify going bleed over Gladiator, because Gladiator often does offer a lot for bleed, and so you've got to make sure that you've got an overall package that's comparable to what you get on a Gladiator. But if you can, Jack the Axe, really good. Terminus Est, even more movement speed, 10% movement speed here. That is almost appealing, but gain a Frenzy Charge on a critical strike. There are builds, cough cough, Flicker Strike, that really, really like this stat. So Terminus Est, definitely something that's got a lot in it, and you should consider this as an option for certain builds. Widow Hail. Widow Hail was originally teased at being 100% increased bonuses gained from Equipped Quiver. They did not like what this was doing in terms of the number of additional arrows that you could get, and so it has been nerfed. It is going to be 75%, at which point it's still good with the Poised Prism, it's still good with certain things, but it's not completely and utterly ridiculous anymore. Kitava's Feast, melee strike skills deal splash damage to surrounding targets. Recover 5% of life on kill, and the text enemies killed by your hits are destroyed. That is not something you always want. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not. Ultimately, Kitava's Feast here is something that is just generic power, but power with a drawback that is going to interfere with a bunch of things you might be doing, like, for instance, any proliferation effects that you might want to continue radiating out from corpses. It's going to splat those. Grace of the Goddess was correctly identified by players in the past. People worked out what this item was, but we sort of had been guessing that it might be something akin to the old Doomfletch option that was on the Scavenger over in the Freesia event. It's not. Grace of the Goddess here is granting you the other stats that are present on it, which is something for wand attack builds to consider. +2 to the maximum number of Sacred Wisps that you've got, and +2 to the number that are summoned each time you summon one or more of them. This is only useful in conjunction with a specific support, and so it is for a direct wand attack build only, but there's quite a bit that's going on there, and you could potentially use that quite well. Editing Gog here. Guess who forgot to cover Beltimber Blade in the first draft of this video? If you guessed me, congratulations! You're right, it was probably pretty obvious to guess, but anyways. 80% increased evasion rating while moving is a lot of that stat, but it's also one of those stats that's mostly not something you want. The key thing here, though, is that as long as you're frequently using movement skills, you get a really big boost out of this. Not for every build, but skills fire 2 additional projectiles if you have used a movement skill recently. This is very, very powerful on builds that are firing a small number of projectiles. As with all boosts to the number of projectiles you fire, it's a powerful stat, but it does have not really diminishing returns, but it's more effective when you're getting some sort of multiplicative returns out of it. So keep that in mind. This is quite strong. This is going to get used, especially because you can now get it divorced from it being on a bad weapon. But at the same time, it's also something that may fall off on certain projectile builds. I feel like this is at its best actually on melee builds that fire projectiles, because if you're playing with a bow, you can get a lot of other projectiles from other sources. On the top end, we have the caster-oriented weapons. And here, I'm just going to move my face out of the way so that you can see all of the different options that are there. You probably have already worked out exactly how this is laid out by now. This is ascendancy. Mard is teaching first. Minions' base attack critical strike chance is equal to the critical strike chance of your main hand weapon. Now, Tripanon memes obviously come to mind here. Tripanon is a weapon that is absolutely terrible in every way, except for one thing. It has a base critical strike chance of a 100%. So there's a very, very high opportunity cost here. You're giving up your Ascendancy 6-pointer. You are also giving up a 2-handed weapon slot. In exchange for that, though, your minions always crit. That's pretty strong. And there'll be some shenanigans people play with this. I'm not sold on it as a whole package, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone finds a way to make it work. Of course, though, you are giving up a lot of really, really good weapon options that you can get there. Replica Heartbreaker, 60% chance to impale on spell hit. 60% is a lot. It's higher than Replica Heartbreaker has, but it's going to be very hard to get that up to 100%. It's a scaling vector that doesn't really exist on spells except in a couple of weird ways at the moment. So it's an option. I don't think many people are going to take it, but it is cool to have it there as an option. Mystic Refractor. Most skills don't want this, but the skills that do, it's phenomenal on. Spells fire 2 additional projectiles, and projectiles cannot continue after colliding with targets. So this means you cannot chain, you cannot fork, you cannot pierce, you cannot have returning projectiles. But in exchange for that, you get +2 projectiles on your spells. This is really good on certain things. For instance, I believe Forbidden Rite does really well with this effect, and it's not the only gem that can do that. The Burden of Shadows is something that causes skills to cost life instead of 50% of their mana cost. This is sometimes a benefit, sometimes a drawback. Often, though, it's just going to be something that will change the way your build feels. And on top of that, spells deal added chaos damage equal to 5% of your maximum life. That's quite a lot. You need to be able to scale spell hit-based chaos damage or spell poison damage, which is something that can be a bit tricky, but if you find a way to make it work, Burden of Shadows has a lot of power in it. Sibyl's Paw is next, and it has the text gain 20 life per enemy hit with spells. This is not impossible to get elsewhere, but it is fairly clunky to get elsewhere, so it's nice to have that. But the main thing you've got here is 8% increased spell damage per 5% chance to block attack damage. In practice, this is going to be 120% increased spell damage, which is quite nice. And coming alongside the 20 life per enemy hit with spells, there's a lot of things that are going on there. And Cadigan's Authority, very build-around item, plus 3 to the maximum number of summoned totems, but you cannot have more than 2 summoned totems of the same type. Most builds, including most totem builds, do not want this. This is a terrible effect for most builds. But if you're willing to really change up and build around a weird totem setup, then Cadigan's Authority does have a lot going for it. This on its own is going to take your totem maximum up to 4, and you're then going to be able to invest elsewhere in getting that up to 5 or beyond. But in exchange for that, you're going to need to probably have 3 different totem setups inside your gear. So you'll have your main 6-link, or potentially 7-link with Soul Mantle, and then you'll have something in your helmet, which is probably going to be Forbidden Shaco at the end game, and you're going to have something else somewhere else on your character as well. There's a lot of potential there, but it's also going to be quite tricky to make work. So best of luck figuring that one out. It's not going to be easy. Also remember, of course, that the Reliquarian is going to reset at the end of this league. So whatever you make in 328, your character is going to be completely scuffed if you're the sort of person that likes playing things in standard. Finally, we have the jewelry slot. I would say the jewelry was more interesting on the Freesia Scavenger, I think, but there is one thing here that's really interesting. So of course, we'll cover that one last. Let's start with Prospero's protection. Armor from your equipped shield is doubled. Also 10% chance to block attack damage. That's all nice. You gain no armor from your equipped body armor, so you're going to have some other defenses that are present there. Ultimately, this is something that is kind of dubious in a lot of cases. I'm really not sold on Prospero's protection here. I'm sure there'll be 1 or 2 cases where it's good, but just in general, I'm not that keen to get even 5,000 armor for an ascendancy, even 5,000 armor and 10% attack block. I don't think that's so great. There's the odd situation where you can make this work with other interactions. Tear of Purity is next. This one has been nerfed in Ruthless for some funny reason. Grants a level 30 Purity of Elements skill. Purity of Elements has 100% increased mana reservation efficiency. So remember, 100% increased mana reservation efficiency is not 100% free. You're still paying something for this. This is one of those things that I think is really bad once you got Mage Blood, but really good before Mage Blood. And that's because it's going to mean you don't really need to focus at all on getting all of your resistances everywhere else, nor are you going to need to deal with elemental ailments anywhere else. This is the sort of thing that just removes a lot of load-bearing requirements from the rest of your gear, which then means you can focus more on having damage on your gear instead of just meeting the bare minimum necessary to be able to be a survivable character. So it's stronger than it looks, but it's not forever. Once you get Mage Blood, you don't want this anymore. And potentially even before getting Mage Blood, you might decide, you know what, I've got enough that I don't need this anymore. So make sure you've got a plan for something else that you can spec into at that point. Astral Projector is next. This is very build enabling. Nova spells cast at the targeted location instead of around you. Spell skills have 25% increased area of effect. This is an effect that people find absolutely essential to have on certain builds, particularly Shockwave Totem. This is going to be the preeminent Shockwave Totem ascendancy if you want to play that build, probably just because this is here, unless you're willing to give up your amulet slot to get Astral Projector there. Although, of course, there is the new Transfigured Shockwave Totem, which works differently and will require different building because you've got to be tankier yourself to use it. But Astral Projector is going to be best in slot for certain builds here, and that's something that's really cool to see. The Burden of Truth is next. 33% of non-chaos damage taken bypasses Energy Shield. 33% of chaos damage taken does not bypass Energy Shield. So in short, just like the Cyrus Belt, this splits the damage that you take. This is actually really useful if you are playing a build that has more life than you've got Energy Shield, but that you do have an appreciable amount of both. On top of that, this also gets you towards there. 10% of maximum life added as extra maximum Energy Shield. This is what I would term a middling strong defensive notable. I don't think it's great. I think it's just good. And you definitely want to be using it alongside split recovery. So you need to have both life and energy shield recovery. You need to have burst, but this can allow you to benefit from both of them simultaneously. And finally, in the non-complex and straightforward ones, we have Astromantis, plus 60 to all attributes. I feel like this is a bit of a miss in most situations. It comes online after attribute requirements stop being quite so much of a problem, and whilst you definitely get some benefit out of it, you can then go and tattoo over some things. I don't think in general this is fantastic. There are a few builds that want to attribute stack. I'm not sure that this is the ascendancy for them, but it would be good if you are going to attribute stack, then Astromantis is going to be a very good fourth notable for you. And additionally, there are a few things that you can build around, few items that exist in the game that have ridiculously high attribute cost. At the higher end, this is Blunderbore and Garb of the Ephemeral. At the lower end, this is things like Mjolnir. So those become options, but of course, Astromantis on your Ascendancy is competing with one of the options available on a Timeless Duel. And finally, we have Warped Timepiece. I've left the best one here for last. Debuffs on you expire 100% faster. This is a stat that does nothing for the vast majority of players. But let's talk Beacon of Madness. This is an item that is Delirium themed. It's a unique set of two-tone boots, and there are 3 different versions of it. All of them grant you the Embrace Madness skill. Embrace Madness causes you to suffer very, 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 very rapidly scaling debuffs that are Delirium themed. They are very, very scary. However, at the same time, there are tremendous benefits to wearing these. So the Fire and Lightning version of these, you are immune to elemental elements while you're affected by Glorious Madness, and you have Igniting, Shocking, and Chilling Conflux while affected by Glorious Madness. So this means that you are always, all your damage, doesn't matter what it is, whether it be chaos, whether it be physical, whether it be fire, all of this is able to, and always does, ignite, chill, and shock. That's very strong. But then we have the better ones. 20% chance to deal double damage while affected by Glorious Madness, and plus 15 to maximum fortification while affected by Glorious Madness. Or there is all damage inflicts poison while you're affected by Glorious Madness, and enemies that you kill while affected by Glorious Madness have a 40% chance to explode, dealing a quarter of their life as chaos damage. And hey, guess what? That also inflicts poison. So tremendous power that's present here. However, in order to make this item work at all, you need to stack a lot of debuffs on you expire 100% faster so that you can deal with all of the detrimental sides that exist on the Beacon of Madness boots and that Glorious Madness skill. Most of the time this involves taking up several item slots on your character, sometimes using the unique chest Stasis Prison, which is incredibly rare. And additionally, because this is an 8-pointer, it takes 3 points to get to the first ones, the armor ones, it takes another 3 to get to the weapons, and then it takes another 2 to get to the final point. Because this is ultimately an 8-pointer setup, this means that it is incompatible with the Delirium bloodline that further scales up that Beacon of Madness boots and provides you an alternate way to access those skills. So this is an option. It's a very complex option. It's one that you need to do a lot of research into before you elect to go with it. But it does some cool things and is something I recommend considering, not as your first build of the league, but maybe as something to look into if you feel like rolling a second character, particularly if you want to roll something that's much more complex. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. That's a lot of news for today. I'm going to have a bunch of fun editing that down. May your Varlorbs have interesting results, and I will see you tomorrow. Hopefully, I'll work out what I want to league start for 3.28 and the Mirage League.